Hello, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started with a lecture on credit cards and a thing we'll call the unpaid balance method. One thing I want to say actually before we get into this is kind of a little disclaimer of sorts. So just keep in mind that when I'm giving these lectures on financial math, and in particular these next three lectures, which will be on credit cards, mortgages, and student loans. When I'm giving these lectures, keep in mind that I'm just a math teacher. I'm not a pro at these things. I'm not a mortgage broker. I don't work for a bank. Doing these things. So take a lot of what I say with a grain of salt. There, most of what I talk about is just straight out of a textbook, and obviously things are different in the real world and different scenarios. So yeah, just kind of take what I say with a grain of salt. Keep in mind that I am teaching this from a purely mathematical standpoint, as opposed to maybe from an actual finance person standpoint. So yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into credit cards, and we'll go ahead and start here with credit cards and talking about this idea of revolving credit. So let's go ahead and get into what revolving credit actually is. And basically, if you ever have a loan where there's no set number of payments or a set payoff date, so you can think of all of the types of loans that we've talked about. We've talked about car loans a little bit. We've talked about installment loans, things like that. In all these loans, you had like monthly payments or something like that. But in this case, if we don't have a set number of payments or a set payoff date, we call that revolving credit. And the primary example of this is credit cards. That's really the big sort of thing that we'll look at. And so with a credit card, you don't have to pay it off every month. It's good if you do, but in theory, you don't have to. You don't really have a date that you are forced to pay it off by. You could just keep taking out money, just keep borrowing money on that credit card. And obviously, eventually, you'll probably get in trouble if you don't pay it off. But in theory, there's no set payment schedule. There's no payoff date. You don't have to worry about any of that. It's just you borrowing money, and you got to be smart about paying it back on your own terms. We call that revolving credit. So if you ever look at a credit card statement, typically they'll look like this with these four things listed on it. Not all credit cards do this, but most do. So most credit cards will follow this unpaid balance method, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically, this idea of an unpaid balance, it's the amount of money that you didn't pay off from the previous month. And so let's say that my credit card statement currently said $500 for the month of October. Well, when I carry on into the month of November, then my credit card balance is going to carry over that $500, and that's just what I didn't pay for in the last month. If I paid all of it off month to month, if I just paid off my entire credit card statement, that's great. You wouldn't have any unpaid balance, and that's good, as we'll see why in a second. So the unpaid balance is just how much money you didn't pay off in the previous month, and we'll see in a second that carries over to the next month, to that current month that you're on. Interest, obviously, we're taking out a loan. Basically, whenever you use a credit card, you're borrowing money, and so you have to pay interest on that money that you borrow on. And as I've been saying, most of the time, this is how credit cards work. Most of the time, the interest accrues on whatever the unpaid balance was from the prior month. In very few instances on credit cards, sometimes the interest actually will accrue daily. And that's obviously bad because you're probably not going to your bank statements and paying off your credit card every single day. And in that scenario, if you don't, your interest would keep accruing every single day that you haven't paid it off. Unfortunately for us, most of the time that's not the case. Most of the time, interest just accrues on the unpaid balance from the previous month. And then the last two things are fairly obvious, fairly easy to understand. On your credit card statement, you'll have any purchases that you made during the month, and then any payments that you make. So if you decide to try to pay off your credit card balance, just a bit or all of it in full, that's going to be a payment that you make, and so that'll decrease the amount that you owe on your statement. So I kind of referenced this idea of this unpaid balance, and that being this the most common method of sorts for credit cards. Let's actually look at exactly what that says. So the unpaid balance method, it just says that the interest that is charged to you, the interest that gets added to your account, it's only on whatever your balance was from the previous month. And so, you know, if you're looking at month one, and you have a bunch of a bunch of money that you haven't paid back yet, the moment that month two starts, they're going to charge you interest on whatever you didn't pay off in month one. So it's good to pay off your interest, you know, before your monthly cycle starts over again. Let's go ahead and look at an example just to see what this unpaid balance method does and how it sort of works in real life. And that'll pretty much be it. With credit cards, we're pretty much just going to deal with the unpaid balance method. So let's say that Elliot had an unpaid balance of $356.75 at the beginning of the month of April. So April 1st, he had an unpaid balance of $350. So that's just an amount that, you know, basically on April 1st, it says, hey, you owe $356. You got to pay this back by the end of the month, or we're going to charge you interest on it. So if he doesn't pay this back by the last day in April, they're going to add interest to this, and then he's going to have to owe more during the month of May, the next month. So April 1st, that's how much is listed on his account, on his statement, that's how much he owes. And then let's say that throughout the month of April, Elliot makes some more purchases. So he goes out and he buys some things, he buys some clothes, he buys some groceries, and he adds $436.50 to how much he's going to owe. So that's some more info there. Let's also say during the month, he makes a payment of $200. So just at some point during the month, maybe in the middle of April, he says, hey, I got a paycheck. Let's pay off $200 of what I owe, which you can clearly tell is not going to be all of it, but it's going to be some of it. So that'll help. His credit card that he's been using, it has an interest rate on the unpaid balance. So remember, that's what we talked about here. We're only charging interest on whatever the balance from the prior month was. So the card has an interest rate on the unpaid balance, and it's 1.8% per month. And this is something that I really, really want to stress, is the units here on per month. Most credit cards, they will list an interest rate, and it is a monthly interest rate. So if I gave you a credit card, I said, hey, it's 2% per month. If you were to actually look at that over the course of the year, that would look like 24% per year. And we've done a lot of problems where we've seen interest rates, and 24% is really, really high. So you got to be very careful on credit cards, because it's very easy to see an advertised, hey, 2%, and think that, oh, that's a really good interest rate. 2% is really low. But if it's every month, that stacks up a lot over the course of a year. So be very careful about that with credit cards. Almost all of the time, credit cards interest rates are in units of per month. So be careful on that. What we want to do is, given all of this info, given his unpaid balance at the start of April, given his purchases, given his payments, given this interest rate, we want to find the finance charge as well as the balance due on May 1st. So how much he'll owe at the start of the next month. So first things first, we actually want to calculate the interest that's going to accrue. And so his unpaid balance at the start of April was this $356.75. And as we've said with the unpaid balance method, the interest that is going to be added into his account is only going to carry over from the previous month. And so really all I have to do to start off this problem is calculate the interest that accrues for this amount. Because at the end of April, the moment that we switch from the last day of April to the first day of May, the bank is going to say, all right, this is how much your unpaid balance was. We're going to charge you interest on that. So if we go ahead and do that, we have I equals PRT. We're going to be doing simple interest here. I guess I didn't explicitly say that in here. Maybe I could add in, let's go ahead and do that. Add in a simple interest rate. A simple interest rate on the unpaid balance. So we'll do simple interest. We've got I equals PRT. The amount that we're calculating the interest on is that unpaid balance from the prior month, that $356.75. The interest rate is that 1.8%, and I'm writing it as a decimal. And then be very careful here. This 1 is in terms of months. So this interest rate was in terms of per month. So as we've mentioned before, we want to make sure that we keep our units lining up appropriately. So this is in terms of months, and we're just going from 1 month to the next. And so that time is going to just be 1. We don't need to divide it by 365 days. We don't need to divide it by 12 months. We don't need to do anything like that. We're just leaving the units here in terms of months because our interest rate is in terms of months. So there we go. So we get an interest, $6.42. And so what the unpaid balance method says is, all right, you owed $356.75 at the beginning of the month, but we're going to add $6.42 at the start of the next month because you haven't paid us back yet. So taking out, let's sort of just for a second, forget about the purchases and the payments that he made. This just says, hey, you owed $356.75 on April 1st. If you don't pay that back during the month of April, on May 1st, we're going to add $6. Now you owe us, 362 or whatever that actually ends up being. And then you owe 362. And then if you don't pay that back during the month of May, they're going to add some more interest, and it's going to just keep piling on top of it, on top of each other. And you're just going to keep owing more and more and more. So we're going to add this $6.42 to that unpaid balance. Then we'll sort of include the purchases and the payments that came into place. So if we look at this, the new balance, so how much Elliot is going to owe at the start of May 1st, it's going to be whatever he owed from the last month, which we call unpaid balance. So that's that $356 carried over from April 1st. It's the interest that gets added to that as sort of a, hey, you didn't pay your amount, right? You didn't pay your unpaid balance from before. You owed us $356 and you didn't pay it during the month of April. So we're going to add that $6.42 into your account as sort of a charge. It's a finance charge. And then we obviously want to add any purchases that were made, and we want to subtract off any payments that were made because he's using the card and paying off the card. And so if we do all that, basically breaking this down, it's how much he owed from the last month carrying over, the interest that they're charging him as sort of a slap on the wrist for not paying off this amount in full. Then we add his purchases. He used the card to buy things during the month, and we subtract off any payments he made. And now we're at just shy of $600, and that's his balance on May 1st. And so that's how much he owes. That's the answer to the question. We're done there. Just one more thing to mention. If I had then had you go and do this problem again, so if we said, hey, let's carry it over to June 1st, his balance would be here. And now this would be the new unpaid balance. This is how much he owes on May 1st, and he hasn't paid it off yet. So if the entire month of May goes along and he doesn't pay all of this off, then the interest is going to accrue on that. And they're going to charge, they're going to add another, interest amount. It'll be different from 642, but they'll add another interest amount according to that simple interest formula to that. And then he would owe even more on June 1st. And it would keep going. And the cycle just kind of never ends. It's very easy to see how these, with these formulas and these interest rates, how it can get out of hand very quickly. I would highly recommend maybe going to Google and looking at, I'm sure there's calculators on the internet that sort of show you, how credit card, how credit card statements and credit cards can get out of hand very quickly. The biggest thing that I always try and keep in the back of my mind whenever I use a credit card is trying to really understand that that credit card is not my money that I'm spending. So if I go to the grocery store and I spend $50 on groceries and I use my credit card, that is not my $50. That's the bank's $50. And so if I don't pay them back quickly, they are going to charge me more. And so really then those groceries, instead of costing $50, they cost me 53, because of interest added in. And it's so just always try and keep in the back of your mind whenever you're using a credit card that it is not your money that you're spending, and you have to pay it back at some point, otherwise bad things can happen. So it's very, very smart. This is probably obvious, but it's very smart to not use your credit card on purchases that are more than what you can pay off immediately. If you have a checking and a savings account, do not spend more on your credit card than you have in that account, because you have to pay off that credit card amount quickly. Otherwise, you're going to deal with this unpaid balance method. You're going to have interest added on, and then it can just cycle out of control as you start to spend more and more money. Not to mention that keeping your unpaid balance at zero, keeping your credit card statements, at a balance of zero, paying them off every month is excellent for your credit. It's a great way to increase your credit score, get a good credit history, in which all of that can help you get lower interest rates on things like car loans or a mortgage on a house, or even credit cards. If you want another credit card, you can get a lower interest rate. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on credit cards. Just pay them off. Don't treat credit cards as free money. It's not your money. And just be smart about it, because it's very easy to get out of control with it. So there we go. That's our lecture for the day, and we'll go ahead and end it there.